The Big Apple of the NFL's eye, Tommy DeVito, shaken to his core by a New Orleans Saints defense that set the tone for the New Orleans Saints' best and most complete game, including Derek Carr's best game as a New Orleans Saint. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you for this live episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Ross Jackson, credentialed media member covering your New Orleans Saints. As a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, and here with you every single Monday through Friday and then some on Locked On Saints. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to update you with the playoff push. The New Orleans Saints getting a much-needed victory here against the New York Giants. Now what do they need to do next to keep their postseason hopes alive? We're going to take a look at a defense that established the tone early and an offense that more than followed up on it and made good on their promise. And we're going to kick it all off with a look at Derek Carr's best game as the New Orleans Saints quarterback and how it all came together for the New Orleans Saints' most complete game of the season. Appreciate you being an everydayer here, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. You can post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Terms and conditions apply. Today, this 24-6 victory over the New York Giants was the New Orleans Saints' best performance of the season so far, and by far Derek Carr's best game as a New Orleans Saints quarterback. That's where I want to start off today's episode. I've been critical of Derek Carr when it's time to be critical of Derek Carr, so I'm here to praise Derek Carr when it's time to praise Derek Carr. I did a show last week wherein I discussed the importance of Derek Carr starting to change the perception, the opportunity in this game to start to change the perception, not to do it all in one game, but to start to change the perception of him within this New Orleans Saints fan base, amongst media, maybe perhaps within the organization too, who knows? And I think that today he got off to the right start. It's not all said and done, but this was absolutely the game that Derek Carr needed, and it was the game that the New Orleans Saints needed as well. Derek Carr in this game going 23 of 28. That's 82% of his passes that he completed. Best mark of the season so far. 134 QB rating. Best mark of the season so far. 218 yards and 3 touchdowns. His first 3-touchdown game as the New Orleans Saints quarterback. And the Saints are now 5-0 when Derek Carr throws at least 2 touchdowns in a game. This is the game that Derek Carr needed. This is the game that New Orleans Saints fans wanted. This is the game that the New Orleans Saints themselves wanted as well. For the past 2 weeks of this New Orleans Saints homestand here over the course of the past 3 weeks, 2 weeks prior to this game, Derek Carr greeted with the Boo Birds, right? People letting the New Orleans Saints organization know that they are not happy with what they've seen from the New Orleans Saints so far today. An entirely different atmosphere here in the Superdome, and an entirely different atmosphere even in the locker room as well, as we were there after the game, seeing everybody kind of in much better spirits than they even were last week when they beat the Carolina Panthers by a greater score. Remember the Carolina Panthers game last week, the Saints won 28-6, this game 24-6, and you feel much better about this game. Heck, I feel much better about this game than I did than the 34-0 shutout against the New England Patriots earlier on in the season. This is the game that the Saints needed. So you go from the Boo Birds and the understandable frustration of the fan base last week. Derek Carr talking earlier this week about wanting to give everything that he had mentally and physically to give this stadium, these fans, this city something to cheer for, and took the right steps to get that started today and to help that happen today. It wasn't just him. The defense played phenomenal. The New Orleans Saints had to really see a big boost from some pass catchers, whether it be whether it be young wide receivers, tight ends, running backs, whatever it might be. The Saints had to get all of that going for them ahead or during this game as well, especially with some of the injuries that they had. And I thought that they did that. I thought that they did a good job doing what they needed to do to be able to cover up some of the things that they were missing, some of the young talent being able to kind of step up to fill some of the gaps, the next man up mentality, all of that. The Superdome today, by the time about 5.5 minutes left in the game, the Who Dat chant started to break out. People singing Margaritaville at the top of the fourth quarter. Us versus them was on and popping today here in the stadium. We saw Choppa Style Blair with the whole stadium dancing. Jamal Williams cutting up on the sideline for the second week in a row. All of that. It felt like a New Orleans Saints home game for the second week in a row for the first time in a long time. Not only did Derek Carr have those great raw stats, but if we look at the entire offense as a whole, the protection was there in this game. The run game got going as well. Some big runs popping off for Alvin Kamara. Didn't even really need a ton of the Taysom Hill run game in this one. The Saints were able to move the ball on the ground pretty adequately one way or another, whether it's Taysom Hill, Jamal Williams, or Alvin Kamara. Derek Carr completing passes to 10 different players in this game. First time that that's happened. Shout out Drew Prochet for this one. First time that that's happened since the Halloween game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2 years ago in 2021. So you saw this New Orleans Saints team who were down Michael Thomas, who have been down Michael Thomas for 4 weeks now, who were down Chris Olave, who wasn't good to go before this game, heading into a short week, needing some of those young receivers to step up. You don't really see, one receiver with over 100 yards or anything like that, but you didn't necessarily need that. You needed a plethora of pass catchers to step up in this game, and the New Orleans Saints absolutely got that. You saw that from Rashid Shaheed. You saw that from Juwan Johnson with a big wide-open touchdown catch. Jimmy Graham caught a touchdown. Jimmy Graham caught the safety attention. Keith Kirkwood, opening Keith Kirkwood up for his touchdown all alone in the red zone. The game, the play calling, the scheme, all of it was there. Shout out Pete Carmichael, a good game called. Ronald Curry, great offensive design in the passing game in this one. He helps big time to contribute to that as well. Ronald Curry needs to be on the top of every New Orleans Saints fan's mind in case the New Orleans Saints do indeed change offensive coordinator this offseason, which I still think is in the cards for New Orleans. Ronald Curry showing you that he can draw some stuff up, scheme some stuff up, and get some nice things going for this New Orleans Saints team. But it wasn't just the offense. The defense fantastic in this game as well. I mentioned Tommy DeVito, the apple of the NFL's eye, going into this game, riding high with the New York Giants on a 3-game win streak. 7 sacks in this game, 3 of them from Tanah Kpassagnon, 2 of them from rookie Bryan Bresee, who had an outstanding game, ran over Justin Pugh, the New York Jets' big, I'll say versatile, but more so experienced center in this game. Just everything on and popping all throughout. The secondary showed up. First play of the game was a pass breakup down the right sideline, deep on Paulson or by Paulson Adebo when they tried to take that shot there. The New Orleans Saints did exactly what it is that they need to do. Now, are they done now? Absolutely not, right? Like, they're still trying to keep pace in the division. They're still trying to keep pace in the conference. They have to follow this up with more victories. We've talked about this over and over again so far this year, as well as last year, too, to where we've seen this Saints team win 2 games, lose 2 games, win a game, lose 2 games. Can they now string together based on the momentum that they're building? And what Alvin Kamara told me was an identity-building game for this team. Still much to be built, still much to achieve. And the New Orleans Saints, though, getting off on the right foot in terms of getting that done. So now we're going to be taking a look at not only the offensive side, but the defense, which set the tone early thanks to none other than Demario Davis, who might have played one of his best games of the season and maybe one of his best games in a Saints uniform. Let's break down how the defense set the tone and the New Orleans Saints offense followed it up as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. If you're a small business trying to get hiring done, trying to make sure you get all these interviews down, it can be a bit of a hassle, a bit of a headache. That's why LinkedIn Jobs is here to help make it easier with their network of over 1 billion different professionals that you can have access to. Hiring gets a lot easier when you have a pool of that size to be able to select from. So thank goodness that LinkedIn is out there to be able to help you figure out things, make your process more intuitive, make it quicker, make it easy, get all of the hiring tools that help to simplify the process, all that. So if you're a small business looking to add to your team, you can post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Once again, that's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We are turned over here in New Orleans right now. Everybody's kind of excited about this one. Sorry if you're catching the noise in the background while they clean up the Superdome floor here. I see in the chat everybody's on and popping. This was the game that the New Orleans Saints needed, and I will tell you this much. The New Orleans Saints defense was the force that we're used to seeing it be in this game. Maybe one of the best defensive games and best defensive performances that we've seen from this team all season long. And it was led early on with the tone being set by none other than number 56 himself, Demario Davis. Demario Davis, in the first 11 defensive snaps of this game, all right? Just the first 11. He was great all game. There were a lot of standouts all game as well. But Demario Davis, in the first 11 snaps of this game, 4 combined tackles, 3 of which solo, 1 tackle for a loss, an additional hit on the quarterback, and a sack to start the game in the first 2 possessions, the first 11 plays of this game. There were some pretty bad penalties called in this game. The roughing the kicker call early on was fine, but then you look at the unnecessary roughness penalty against Alante Taylor at one point. There were a lot of opportunities for this New York Giants defense or offense to really kind of get things going, but the New Orleans Saints defense buckled down, held strong, and kept that from happening. Demario Davis setting that tone early. Couple of numbers that I want to go over here for you. The New Orleans Saints run defense performed fantastic in this one. You look at Tommy DeVito and the escapability that he had. He was the New York Giants leading rusher in this game, but with just 36 rushing yards on 4 escapes or 4 scrambles in this one. Not necessarily the performance that we expected to see from Tommy DeVito, who ran 10 times for 70 yards last week in that big win that kind of gave the New York Giants their momentum coming into this game. The New Orleans Saints sacked him 7 times, celebrating with the paisan, the Italian hand emoji, if you will. That was outstanding by the New Orleans Saints defense. Then you add on top of that the fact that the pass rush was cooking, but the Giants couldn't run the ball. Saquon Barkley, 14 rushing yards in this game, averaged less than 2 yards per carry. The New York Giants as a whole averaging less than 4 yards per carry in this matchup. The Saints forced Tommy DeVito and the New York Giants, who have a bad offensive line, to drop back, have to hold on to the ball, have to progress through because the coverage was really good. We talked about how important the perimeter defense was going to be in this game. You saw them continuously attack the perimeters in the passing game, not really pay attention to the middle of the field. Saints defenders, Isaac Yiadom, as well as, of course, Paulson Adebo holding it down there. Alante Taylor with a couple of big hits, being able to close on rushers. Tackling was really solid. Tyrann Mathieu talked about that after the game. Being able to get those players down at the catch point or soon after the catch point. Not a lot of yards after catch for this New York Giants team. Not a lot given up by the New Orleans Saints. The Saints did what they needed to do in order to be able to get this one done. And I want to revisit the 7 sacks, because when you take away the run game, the way that the Saints did in this game, and your pass rush is on, you're forcing the Giants to drop back, have to do the things that maybe Tommy DeVito's a little bit uncomfortable with at this point in his career. Dennis Allen did a good job scheming up that defense, creating some issues for that New York Giants offense that wants to be able to run and gun, that wants to be able to take advantage of the perimeter, that wants to get outside, that wants to take advantage of you being overly aggressive. But the New Orleans Saints found ways to take their aggression, but still find the integrity that they needed to be able to hold up to this team. Zach Bond, again, effective as a pass rusher. Who'd have thunk it? Get the guy involved in the NFL doing the thing that he was excellent doing in college, and it works out. Who would have thought that that would happen, right? You look at Tanah Kpassagnon, his first career 3-sack game in this one. So you get the Saints defense kind of creating those opportunities early, holding the New York Giants to 2 of 16, just 13% when it comes to third down percentage. Starting field position was fantastic for New Orleans throughout. So you get all that going from the defense, but then you're able to capitalize on it with your offense over on the other side. So the offense had to follow through and hold up their end of the bargain as well, and I think that they did that. 2 of 2 in the red zone. Jimmy Graham, a third touchdown, 3 games in a row here at the Superdome. That's what you want to see from this team. Juwan Johnson back in the fold with a touchdown catch in this one. Keith Kirkwood catching his first touchdown, I think Luke Johnson said, since like 2018 or so. I mentioned the 10-plus passers that caught catches in this game, or pass catchers that caught passes in this game. Those all came from, or that was the most since 2021. So you're seeing all of it come together. So while the Saints defense was getting the Giants off the field, the Saints did a good job staying on the field. 6 of 12, 50% in this game on third down. Homeboy's cleaning right behind me. I'm sorry if that's too loud. But this is exactly what the New Orleans Saints wanted to be able to do. I asked Derek Carr about how much it meant to him to do what it was that he said he wanted to do, which was give the fans here something to cheer about. And he talked about how important that was to him and how much he felt it here and how great it was. But also, like a good neighbor, but like a good quarterback, like a good NFL professional, knows that there are still things to continue to build off of moving forward here. So the Saints here should be able to continue to build off of this pass rush. Need to be able to continue to build off of the success of the run defense that they had today. Should continue to be able to move the ball around. Chris Olave wasn't able to go before this game. Part of the reason why he wasn't able to go before this game, too, was the consideration that had to be had with knowing that the Saints play in 4 days in Los Angeles as well, right? On Thursday Night Football with a short week. So don't rush him back. Be able to come out here and be able to get everything going the way that you want it to go. Get the offense moving the way you want it to move. Start to build an identity for this offense. And now potentially add Chris Olave in next week. But continue to spread the ball around. Continue to hit all the different areas of the field. Continue to utilize and throw passes to wide receivers, running backs, tight ends. This was a familiar game for the New Orleans Saints. This felt very familiar in terms of what it is that the Saints have shown that they can do on the offensive side of the football in the past, and kind of doing something that felt familiar to it in this matchup. So a great game by the New Orleans Saints on both sides of the football. The special teams coming through. Blake Grupe with a very clean 50-yard field goal in this one. Lou Hedley pinning the Giants back within the 10-yard line. 2 weeks in a row that they won the field possession battle. All of that. These are the things that you want to be able to see from the New Orleans Saints from a complete game standpoint, and they put it together in all 3 phases. Coming up next, now the New Orleans Saints have this win, what will things look like for them moving forward? What do they need to do next when it comes to hanging around and staying involved in the playoff conversation? We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network here at Locked On. Look, the Saints were 6-point favorites in this game. I didn't think they could do it. Instead, they beat the New York Giants by 18 points. They tripled that line. So maybe you believed in the New Orleans Saints and you came through, picked them as a favorite, and you were able to walk away with some clean winnings there. We'll see what the line looks like Thursday night against the Rams, but if you want to get involved in it and you've never used FanDuel before, this is absolutely the time to check it out, because if you are a new user over at FanDuel, you can win a $150 amount in bonus bets by simply winning any $5 money line bet. Pick a favorite, get 30-1 odds right off the bat as a new customer. That's $150 you would win if your team wins, that you can then use on player props, on spreads, on over-unders, and much more. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with what the New Orleans Saints need to do to keep their postseason hopes alive. Because do not get it twisted. The postseason hopes are alive and well. And the New Orleans Saints want to compete. Why do they want to compete? Because if they can get to the playoffs, they feel like if they can get hot right now, get to the playoffs, that they can win some playoff games here. That's the way that they feel. Whether you agree or disagree, that's the way that the New Orleans Saints are going to play this season. So what is it that they need to do to be able to keep those postseason hopes alive? Well, right now, the New Orleans Saints are still technically behind the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who did win earlier today, 30-20 over the Green Bay Packers. Keep in mind that also gives Tampa Bay a common opponent victory over a team that the New Orleans Saints lost to earlier on in the season, the Green Bay Packers. Losing that 17-0 lead against the Green Bay Packers looms large for this New Orleans Saints team, and we kind of knew that it would, right? Like, we all kind of had that feeling like, oh, we'll be talking about this one again later on in the season. Here we are talking about this one again later on in the season. So now the next thing for the New Orleans Saints is they've got the 7th seed. They're about to probably surrender that. The last that I saw when it came to the Los Angeles Rams and Washington Commanders, that the Rams are holding a commanding lead. That's still true at the moment that I record this. They're winning 28-7 against Washington in LA. But the Saints have an opportunity next week to get a head-to-head win over the Los Angeles Rams. So with that being the case, that opens them up, if they can get that win, to maybe holding on to the 7th seed and now opening up a wild card path to the playoffs for them. But the division win and the 4th seed is still very much in play for them, and they were aided a little bit by the pitiful, awful loss that the Atlanta Falcons took today against a 1-12, now 2-12 Carolina Panthers team, in which the Carolina Panthers won 9-7. Thank you, I love this suit too. 9-7. Carolina didn't score a touchdown and beat the Atlanta Falcons. So if you were waiting for either the Atlanta Falcons or the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to slip up a little bit so that the New Orleans Saints can gain a little bit of ground in their division, that loss to the Carolina Panthers absolutely generates that for the New Orleans Saints, thanks to a big-time loss by the Atlanta Falcons. Another team that's kind of in play for that wild card spot, so if the Saints don't win their division here in the NFC South, but do still want to get into the playoffs, that wild card position is now open for them. The Seattle Seahawks are kind of in that conversation as well. Seattle Seahawks will play the Philadelphia Eagles tomorrow. There's conversation about what's going to happen with Jalen Hurts going into this game. Will he be good? Will he not be good? Illness, all this other stuff that he's dealing with. So if I'm the Saints, the biggest thing that I want to see is my team, right, if I'm the Saints, win out. Because the Los Angeles Rams, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Atlanta Falcons are your 3 most direct competitors and your most direct competition to hold a postseason spot and to be able to get there. And look, if the Saints drop their game to the Los Angeles Rams next week, they still have a buffer if they can beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and then the Atlanta Falcons at the end of the season. So they could go 3-1 here in the 4-game stretch, which they've done in each of the last 2 seasons. They've gone 3-1 over their last 4 games. So that is a way that the Saints can get into the postseason. But I think a key thing to remember is that they now have this wild card path that's open to them. And that's going to be big. And I know that there were a lot of people kind of coming into these last 4 games saying, hey, the Saints should just lose out because then it's going to bring on the change that's going to benefit the Saints in the long run and all these other things. I can't tell you enough how sure I am that even if the Saints were to go now 1-3 over the course of the last 4, the only change that's probably happening this offseason is a change to offensive coordinator. A lot of folks are saying, well, if the Saints lose and don't make the playoffs, then they'll fire Dennis Allen, they'll get rid of Derek Carr. I don't think either of those things are happening. This New Orleans Saints team wants to keep the band together because they kind of don't have a choice going into next year. They don't really have the freedom to be able to move on from players. They're never going to be a team that's going to give up on competing. We've seen that over and over again. They went win now yet again. They're going to go win later on. They're going to go win now next season. It doesn't matter. So if you're the New Orleans Saints, you're trying to win games. And if you're a New Orleans Saints fan, you're trying to see this team win games. And I know not everyone will be convinced, not even I at this moment, simply by this one game. But I think the Saints did 2 things in this game that gives me a little bit of, I'm not going to call it faith, I'm not going to call it belief, but I'll say a little bit of positivity looking at this New Orleans Saints team moving forward. They did 2 things in this game that tell me, yes, this team could potentially earn that wild card spot or that division spot, and I'm looking at it in a more positive way than I was at the end of last week. Number one, they beat a team that they should have beat for the second week in a row. We know that that is an issue that the New Orleans Saints have had. They've beaten a lot of last-place teams. They beat a team that they should have beat today that was not a last-place team. It was a third-place team, but wasn't a last-place team. The second thing, for the first time in a while, the New Orleans Saints had ridiculous amounts of success against a hurt and underwhelming offensive line. How many times have we had the conversation year in and year out? We saw it earlier on this year, where the Saints go up against, with a talented defensive line, even with a defensive line at its best, they go up against an offensive line that's got 3 starters out, a couple of reserve guys in, all these other things. And the Saints don't turn around and generate the pressure that you would expect them to generate. This game was absolutely an example of the opposite of that. And for that, I give the New Orleans Saints credit. For this game, I give Derek Carr credit. His best game as a New Orleans Saint, maybe the best defensive game for the New Orleans Saints as well, maybe the best executing special teams game for the New Orleans Saints as well. It all came together at the right time. Now, can they string it together? Can they maintain success in all 3 phases next week in Los Angeles on a short week? Can they maintain success going into their game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on New Year's Eve in Tampa? And then, maybe, I don't want to say most importantly, but let's say just as important for sure, coming back here at home in the Superdome to close out the season with what would be a raucous fan. If they can take care of business away from home, it would be a raucous scene here in the Superdome against the dreaded, hated Atlanta Falcons. And maybe, just maybe, one more Jimmy Graham touchdown against the Atlanta Falcons. And if I'm Jimmy and I score a touchdown against the Atlanta Falcons in let's say a comfortable lead in Week 18, I'm dunking it. I'm dunking it. Easy. Easy. I'll take the fine. I'll call up Adidas, ask them to cover it, and depending on the lead, I'll take the 15-yard penalty off the field goal or off the kickoff. I'm dunking it if I'm Jimmy Graham. Hey, enjoy this one. Enjoy this one. Naysay, all that, be critical, do all the things that you got to do, because that's what the team's going to do. They're going to take this win. They're going to find ways to be critical about it and try to improve on the short week going up against the Los Angeles Rams. But hey, the New Orleans Saints needed to win this week, and they got it done. And they got it done in perhaps the most convincing fashion that we have seen this New Orleans Saints get a win so far this season. I appreciate you for being an everydayer and for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. Coming up tomorrow, I have another episode for you. What did we like from this victory? A little bit more in-depth than what we discussed today. What did we not like? What do we still want to see this New Orleans Saints team build off of? And, of course, news and notes coming from Dennis Allen's day after presser, some of the Saints players that we talked to as well. But until then, enjoy this one. Live this one up here in the city. Appreciate you for making me a part of your day, part of your routine. For those of you that join live as well, and, of course, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, as always, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, N-O-L-A. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.